In this module, we're going to learn about exploratory data analysis in Stata, focusing on some key commands such as summarize and tabulate, which we will use consistently throughout this course, as well as describe, codebook, and list. Within Stata, open up the Framingham dataset, and let's start exploring this dataset. The first thing we're going to do is describe and get a picture of all the variables that are contained in this dataset. In order to be able to do that, there's a few commands that are typically used. First, in the command line, type describe. And you'll see that for each variable in the dataset, we get a bunch of information as well as we get some information about the dataset as a whole. For instance, the dataset contains 4,434 observations. It contains 74 variables, and it gives us an idea of the size of this dataset. So if I want to scroll down and look at a bunch of the different variables in this dataset, I can either click on More or I can hit the space bar. And you'll see that I get a bunch of information for each covariate. So scrolling back up, we see that within the describe command, we get the variable name, we get the type of variable, the type that it's stored as, we get the display format, the value label, and the variable label. So for now, let's just focus on the variable name and the variable label and what information that gives us. So for instance, we see that this hosp.mi variable, that's the name, but if I wanted to know what's contained in that variable, I could go over to variable label, and I see that it's incident hospitalized myocardial infarctions, or MIs. Okay, so you can see sort of the basic information that's provided in the describe command. If this just isn't quite enough information for you, go ahead and type in. So before I type anything else into the command line, I have to scroll through all the variables in the dataset, hit the space bar, or if I want to break the command, I can go up here and hit the red X, which is break. So I've ended the describe command. Now if I want to get more information about the variables in the dataset, I can type in codebook. And you can see that for every variable in the dataset, I now get a whole lot of information. So scrolling through, let's look at the death indicator. So for death, you can see that the type of variable is numeric. It's stored as a number. The range of that number goes from 0 to 1, and it takes on two different unique values. I just marked over that, but you see. And then it actually gives us the tabulation. It tells us down here that 2,884 people were alive at the end of surveillance in this data set, and that 1,550 people were dead at the end. Another extremely useful piece of information is this over here, this missing information. So it tells us that 0 out of the 4,434 observations in our data set were missing. So codebook is a good way to get an idea of exactly what's contained in the variable, and also very importantly, how much missing data is in that variable. So death was a binary variable. If we scroll down, we're going to run into some continuous covariates, such as time MI. So this is time to incident myocardial infarction. We'll scroll up a little bit and see what's contained in that. So now this is a continuous variable. You'll see that the type of this variable now, it's stored as a numeric, or double is what it says. So it means that this is a continuous number in our data set. We can see now that the range goes from 0 to 24, representing that this data set goes from 0 to 24 years. It takes on a bunch of different unique values, and it gives you these summary statistics that we learned about in class this week. It gives you a mean, a standard deviation, and then you go down here and you can see the percentiles for this data set. And again, the very important information, the number of missing data points for this covariate. Okay, so this gives you a good idea of what codebook and describe do. Now, if I just typed in codebook, you can see that I get information for all 74 variables in my data set. That's usually too much, so I want to break that. Let's say I only wanted information about BMI in my data set. Then I could type codebook, BMI 1, BMI 2, BMI 3, and that's going to give me the codebook information for BMI at exams 1, 2, and 3. So now I no longer get information for 74 variables. I only get the 3 that I asked for. The same thing could be done with the describe command. And you see that now if I specify variables, I'm only now describing the variables that I specify. So this is usually a more concise way of describing the variables that you're particularly interested in. All right, so let's move on. Let's calculate some summary statistics. The first thing I want to do is look at the summarize command. So there's several ways to access the summarize command. I could just type in summarize into the command line and specify a variable that I'm interested in. Alternatively, let's look at how to access the Summarize command through the drop-down menu. I would go Statistics, Summaries, Tables, and Tests, Summary and Descriptive Statistics, and it's this first option, Summary Statistics. So I click on that, and this window pops up for the Summarize command. Now I'm going to look at the properties of systolic blood pressure at baseline or at exam 1 in our study population. So that's the sys-BP1 covariate. So I type that into my variables window, and I hit Submit. Now the difference between hitting Submit and OK within a window in Stata is that if I hit OK, the window goes away. If I hit Submit, the window would stay there. So if I want to get the window back, I'm going to go DB Summarize, and you see that the window comes back. Okay, so let's leave that window there for now, but let's look at what the Summarize command provided for us. So you can see the Summarize command, as it stands, it gives you the number of non-missing observations for systolic blood pressure at exam 1. It gives you the mean, standard deviation, the minimum, and the maximum. So if I wanted to know what is the mean systolic blood pressure, I would simply look at this mean column, and I would say that the mean is 132.9. If I wanted the standard deviation, again, just go over to the standard deviation column, and I see that it's 22.4. Okay, so you see the basic information provided by the Summarize command, but now we move on, and let's say we want to know more information. I want to know what is the median or the 50th percentile of systolic blood pressure at exam 1. If I just type in Summarize systolic blood pressure 1, you see that the median does not appear there. So if I want the median, I need to go back and look at this Summarize window. So within the Summarize window, I can say either within the options, I can either use the standard display or I can display additional statistics. Fortunately, I know that when I ask for additional statistics, the median is going to be provided. So go ahead, hit Submit, and let's see what's provided when we use the Display Additional Statistics option. First, let's look at the command that appears. Instead of just saying Summarize systolic blood pressure at exam 1, I now afterwards put comma detail, telling Stata I want some more information. Now, what exactly do I get with this extra information? Let's look. So you can see that over here on the right-hand side, I get a lot of the same information that was displayed in the standard Summarize command. I get the number of non-missing observations, get the mean, the standard deviation, and then I get some additional statistics down here, such as the variance and a few other summary statistics that we don't know about yet. Anyways, what I'm specifically looking for here is the median. So to find the median, I'm going to go to the percentiles column. And I'm going to remember from class this week that the median is the 50th percentile of my data set. So I go down to the 50th percentile, and I see that the median systolic blood pressure at exam 1 is 129. What if I wanted the range of systolic blood pressure? Now, I could have actually gotten the range of systolic blood pressure from just using the plain old Summarize command without the additional statistics, but I want to show you how to find that when I get those additional statistics as well. So to calculate the range, I'm going to take the smallest observation in my data set and the largest observation in my data set, and I'm going to take the difference between those two. So I go down to the command window, and I would say display 295 minus 83.5. And I would find that the range of my data set is 211.5. Alternatively, if I wanted the interquartile range, I'm going to have to go and I'm going to take the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile and take the difference of those. So I would say display 144 minus 117.5, and I find out that my interquartile range is 26.5. Okay, so right now we've just looked at the general systolic blood pressure in the entire population. Let's say I want to look at specific subpopulations. Let's say specifically I wanted to break it up by gender or by sex. So to use the Summarize command within a specific sex, I could go back, call the Summarize window, and I could go to this By If In tab. I could repeat the command by groups, and I would say I want to repeat it by sex at exam 1, hit Submit, and now you see that I get a bunch of summary statistics for sex equals male and for sex equals female. And if I look at the command that was actually run in Stata, what it says by sex, sort, and then summarize systolic blood pressure at exam 1. The display output's going to be a little more concise if you get rid of the details. So you can see specifically here that it's summarizing for both males and females. So if I get that window for summarize again, and let's say I didn't want any information about females there, I just want to calculate some statistics for males, I could go down and I could say restrict observations, and I could say if sex 1 equals 1, because if sex 1 equals 1, that means that it's a male. And then I hit submit, and now you see that I only get information for males in my data set. Okay. Alternatively, if I just wanted to use the command line to calculate sex-specific information, I could say by sort sex1 summarize cisBP1. And I'm going to get the same information that I saw before. Similarly, I could say summarize cisBP1 if sex1 is equal to 1 and get information only for males. So we've seen how to use the drop-down menus as well as the command line for summarizing within entire populations as well as within subpopulations in our data set. But thus far, we've really only looked at a continuous variable, namely systolic blood pressure at exam 1. So let's move on now and let's start talking about categorical covariates. We've been talking about sex, so let's continue with that. Let's say tabulate sex1, and I can now obtain the number of males and females in the data set at exam 1, or at baseline. So I see that at exam 1 there were 1,944 males, 2,490 females, for a total of 4,434 study observations. If I wanted to do this calculation via the drop-down menus, I would go Statistics, Summaries, Tables, and Tests, Tables, and then I would go down to one-way tables. The categorical variable that I'm interested in is sex1, hit submit, and you see that I get the exact same table as I saw before. Now, we talked a little bit about missing information before. If I just run the tabulate command as it is, missing observations are going to be deleted. If I were to say comma missing, then what would happen is I would get a variable or another row in my table that displayed the number of missing observations for sex1. Unfortunately, I chose a covariate that doesn't have any missing data, but there's going to be some covariates in our data set that do have missing data. Let's see if we can find one. All right, so we're going to look at a variable that does have some missing data, namely sex3, which is the sex at exam 3. Now, by exam 3, some individuals in the data set have died. So for those individuals, they're going to have a missing value for the sex3 indicator. So I can see that now at exam 3, there's 1,387 males, 1,876 females, and then we have 1,171 individuals who have missing data. So you can see what this missing option does. If I hadn't included the missing option, now I'm going to get a table where the total number of observations is no longer 4,434. Rather, it's 3,263. So this missing option is another way to characterize missing data in your data set. So we've looked at how to create a one-way table. That's a table for a binary indicator. Now we're going to look at what if we have two binary indicators that we're going to compare. For example, I want to know the answer to the question, how many women in our data set have prevalent hypertension at exam 1? So again, I can use the tabulate command. I can say tabulate sex1 prev hype 1 and hit enter. And now, rather than this one-way table, I'm going to get a 2-by-2 table where my rows contain the number of males and females, and in the column I have prevalent hypertension at exam 1. So if I want to know the number of women with prevalent hypertension, I go female in the female row, and then I say yes with prevalent hypertension, and I see that the answer to this is then going to be that there are 799 women with prevalent hypertension at exam 1. So this is a brief introduction to 2-by-2 tables, and we're going to delve way more into 2-by-2 tables later in the course. So I'm just going to leave it at that for right now, but you can see how useful this tabulate command would be in practice. The last command we're going to look at is list. So if I wanted to list every observation in my data set, I would just type list, hit enter, and I'm going to get way more information than I actually want. So let's break that. Now, let's say I only wanted to list systolic blood pressure at exam 1. Then I'm going to get the systolic blood pressure for every individual in my data set at exam 1 by just typing list systolic blood pressure 1. Last, let's say I only wanted to list systolic blood pressure for the first 50 observations in my data set. I would say list systolic blood pressure in 1 through 50. So you can see now I only get the first 50 observations in the data set. Alternatively, I could do this through the drop-down menus by going Data, Describe Data, List Data. And within this, I could say I want to list systolic blood pressure 1, and by if in, I only want to use observations 1 through 50. Hit OK, and I get the exact same command that I just ran. So that's the drop-down menu versus command line. In this exercise, we've gone through how to use the summarize command, tabulate, describe, codebook, list, and hopefully now you have a good idea of how you can go about doing exploratory data analysis within Stata. Thank you.